The fire is low tonight, its glow flickering across the wooden beams of this hall. Beyond the walls, the countryside lies hushed, fields resting under the cloak of darkness, trees whispering softly as the autumn wind passes through their branches. You can almost hear the distant hoot of an owl, steady and patient, keeping watch. The day's labors have ended, and in this quiet hour, when the world slows and grows still, we gather by the fire. I invite you to sit with me here, to rest your body, and to let your mind drift gently toward another time. Close your eyes, if you wish, and imagine yourself in England many centuries ago. Picture the rolling hills, the scattered villages with smoke curling gently from thatched rooftops, the muddy paths worn by footsteps of farmers, shepherds, and weary travelers. Imagine the hush of a medieval evening, when candles flicker in narrow windows and the air smells faintly of hearth smoke and damp earth. Life in these lands was often hard, uncertain, and shadowed by war or hunger, but it was also filled with song, laughter, and stories told to ease the burdens of the day. Among the most cherished stories were those of a king. Not just any king, but one who promised fairness, hope, and a vision of something greater than the hardships of ordinary life. His name was Arthur, and his tale has echoed through centuries like the toll of a distant bell. You may have heard it before, perhaps in fragments. A sword in a stone, a round table, a queen, a knight's betrayal. Yet beneath those shining details lies something deeper, a yearning that ordinary people carried in their hearts. For Arthur's Camelot was never only about knights in armor. It was about a dream that common folk could belong to a kingdom of justice, kindness, and unity. When I was a child, sitting by the hearth as you sit now, I heard the elders speak of Arthur with voices hushed and reverent. They would lean close, the firelight dancing in their eyes, and describe how he rose from uncertain beginnings to become the king of a land that longed for peace. To us children, the details seemed magical. Swords that chose their masters, sorcerers who guided destiny, maidens who walked through forests shimmering with mystery. Yet even then, I understood that these tales were not just about wonders. They were about the people who needed to believe that someone, somewhere, could lead with wisdom and fairness. Think of the farmers tilling their fields, their backs bent beneath the sun. Think of the women tending children by dim candlelight, sewing clothes by hand, grinding grain with tired arms. Think of the weary soldier, returning from a border skirmish with little more than scars and stories. For such lives, where every day was measured by survival, the legend of a king who cared for his people was not simply entertainment. It was a comfort, a promise whispered into the night that things could be better. Perhaps you have also felt that longing. In quiet moments, do you ever wonder what it would be like to live in a place where justice truly guided rulers, where promises were kept, and where ordinary voices mattered? That is the heart of Camelot, and it is why we tell these stories still. Now, as I sit by the hearth and you sit with me in spirit, I invite you to imagine yourself walking the paths of that ancient land. The sky above is deep and star-strewn, the Milky Way like a silver river flowing across the heavens. Your feet tread upon the packed earth, damp with evening dew. Around you, fields stretch out, dotted with sheep huddled for warmth, and beyond them, dark forests beckon, full of secrets. In the distance, perhaps, rises a hilltop where a castle stands, its towers pale in the moonlight, its banners fluttering softly. This is Camelot as it might have appeared in a dream, a place not only of grandeur but of welcome. You are not a knight, nor a queen, nor a sorcerer. You are simply yourself, a traveler drawn toward the warmth of that hall. The guards at the gate nod as you pass, their mail shirts glinting faintly. The heavy wooden doors open, and a glow of firelight spills into the cool night. Inside, the air is warm, scented with bread, roasted meat, and spiced ale. The sounds of laughter, of soft music from a harp, and of voices telling stories weave together into a tapestry of comfort. Here, at Camelot's heart, there is a round table, not set high above, not upon a dais, but level with all who sit at it. For Arthur's vision was that no man or woman should stand above another, but that all should meet as equals in service of something greater. It is a simple idea, and yet it is profound. And perhaps that is why it has endured, echoing through centuries of retelling, carrying its message even to us now. As I tell you this story, I do not ask you to believe every detail. Legends grow and change with each voice that carries them, shaped by the hopes of those who whisper them into the firelight. But I do invite you to feel them, to let the images linger in your imagination. The hush of the countryside, the warmth of a hall, the dream of a king who listens. Because, in truth, legends are less about the past than about the longing within us all. So let the firelight soothe you. Let the rhythm of my words carry you gently deeper into rest. There will be battles and betrayals ahead in Arthur's tale. Yes, but tonight, as we begin, let us dwell in this moment of promise. The night is quiet, the air is cool, the hearth is warm. Camelot rises before us, its towers standing proud against the starlit sky, its halls alive with hope. And so, as you settle into comfort, I invite you to imagine, what would it feel like to walk the paths of Camelot yourself? If you enjoy this journey, share a thought with me later. I'd love to know where you felt most at home in this story. The fire burns steady now, the hall wrapped in a hush as if the night itself leans close to listen. Before we walk deeper into Arthur's legend, let us pause for a while and look backward, to the world that shaped him. For Arthur did not appear in a time of comfort or calm. He arose from an age of shadows, when the people of Britain lived in uncertainty, caught between memory and survival. To understand the hope that Camelot inspired, we must first understand the land that longed for it. It is the 5th or 6th century after Christ, and the great Roman legions have long since withdrawn from these islands. Their stone roads remain, half-broken and overgrown with weeds. Their villas crumble into ruin, and their once mighty walls sag beneath ivy and rain. But the order they imposed is gone. In its place lie smaller kingdoms, fragile, shifting, always watching one another with wary eyes. Some are ruled by men who trace their ancestry to Roman governors, others by chieftains who rose from the local tribes, and still others by invaders from across the sea, Saxons and Jutes and Angles pressing against the coastlines, carving out their own footholds. Imagine living in a small village in those times. Your home is a low house of wattle and daub, with a thatched roof and smoke drifting from the hole above. Your family sleeps close together upon straw and wool, for warmth and safety. Beyond your door stretch fields, shared by neighbors, where grain must be sown and harvested according to the turning of the seasons. Each morning you rise at dawn, your breath visible in the chill air, and you step out to tend the goats, or to grind the barley, or to fetch water from the stream. Life is measured not in years, but in harvests, in winters survived, in children raised. The world feels fragile. In the distance, the smoke of another village may rise, and you wonder, is it a neighbor burning stubble from the fields, or a raiding party setting roofs alight? At night, the sound of hooves can stir your heart into fear. You pray that your chieftain's warriors are vigilant, that the gods, or perhaps the god of the new priests who have begun to arrive, will protect your home. Each family depends upon the strength of the whole community, and so bonds of kinship and loyalty are your lifeline. For women, life is both a weight and a strength. From dawn until nightfall, your hands are seldom idle. You grind the grain into flour, brew ale from barley, mend clothing, and tend to the children with watchful care. In the cold months, you sit by the hearth spinning wool, the wheel turning steadily under your touch, while stories drift around you like threads of warmth against the chill. You might be promised in marriage at a young age, your union serving to bind families together or to strengthen your people's claim to land. Yet in your daily labor lies quiet power. The rhythm of work sustains life itself. Family is not only those who share your roof. It is the larger kinship group, the cousins, uncles, aunts, and allies who form a web of support in times of scarcity or war. When one suffers, all feel the burden. When a child is born, the whole village celebrates. And when death comes, as it often does, through sickness, hunger, or battle, the grief is shared, the body laid to rest with rites that blend ancient traditions with the new Christian prayers. The seasons shape every moment of existence. Spring brings planting, hope for rains, and the gathering of herbs. Summer is labor, long days beneath the sun. Autumn demands harvest, the storing of grain, the salting of meat to prepare for the long darkness ahead. Winter tests your endurance. Food runs scarce, the days grow short, and illness prowls like a shadow. Yet winter also brings closeness. Families gathered in lamplight, telling tales to ward off despair. And it is here, in the dark of the year, that legends glow brightest. For when the body is weary, the mind craves hope. Around the hearth, children listen wide-eyed as elders speak of heroes who rose from humble beginnings, of warriors who fought for justice, of kings who united broken lands. These stories soothe the fear that the world is only chaos and cruelty. They weave meaning into the hardships of life, assuring listeners that even in times of turmoil, greatness can rise. It was in such a world that the figure of Arthur began to stir. Perhaps he was a memory of a real leader, some warlord who gathered men to resist the Saxons. Perhaps he was only a dream, a figure spun from longing. Either way, the people needed him. For who could not, in such an age, yearn for a leader who would protect the weak, punish injustice, and restore balance to a fractured land? Think again of yourself, standing in that quiet village. The wind moves through the trees, the hearth glows within your home, and you hear the murmurs of stories spoken in the dark. You know the dangers beyond your fields, raiders, hunger, sickness. Would you not dream of a king who might bring peace? Would you not cling to tales of a just ruler whose very name promised safety and unity? As we sit here together, centuries away from those fragile years, it is easy to forget how much such hope mattered. But to them, it was as necessary as bread. Stories were not luxuries. They were lifelines, giving shape to fear and offering visions of something brighter. So before Arthur was crowned in legend, before Camelot's halls were filled with laughter and song, there was this world, broken, yearning, and uncertain. Out of this soil of longing, the seed of a legend was sown. And as you listen, picture yourself in those quiet villages. Would you have longed for a king to bring peace? Let me know in the comments if you think legends are born out of longing. The night deepens, and the fire before us glows red at its heart, whispering and sighing as if it too remembers stories older than memory. Now that we have lingered in the world before Arthur, fragile and restless, let us turn our eyes to the boy who would one day wear the crown. His beginnings are wrapped in mystery, as though the land itself conspired to shape his destiny. Kings are often born with fanfare, their lineage proclaimed proudly, yet Arthur's birth is told in half-shadow, woven with secrecy, longing, and the strange hand of fate. The tale begins with Uther Pendragon, a warlord king of Britain. He was a man of fiery temper and fierce ambition, eager to hold the fracturing land together under his command. One evening, Uther attended a great feast at the stronghold of Gorlois, the Duke of Cornwall. There he beheld Igraine, the Duke's wife, and his heart was struck. The stories say he loved her instantly, so deeply, so powerfully, that desire and obsession consumed him. Yet Igraine was bound by marriage, her honor tied to her husband, her place already chosen. It is here that Merlin enters the tale, a figure half man, half enigma, spoken of as a prophet, a sorcerer, perhaps even a child of otherworldly descent. Merlin, ever watchful, offered Uther a way to win Igraine's love, or at least her presence. Through enchantment, he cloaked Uther in the likeness of Gorlois. In this borrowed form, Uther came to Igraine's chamber, and that night Arthur was conceived. Some versions tell that Gorlois died in battle the very same night, leaving Igraine widowed and soon remarried to Uther. Thus the boy's life began in secrecy, tangled in magic, passion, and sorrow. Do you feel the unease in such a beginning? For though Arthur would be hailed as a king of justice, his first moments in this world were shrouded in deception. Perhaps that is why the people who heard this story so long ago found it haunting as well as hopeful. They, too, lived in a world where nothing was certain, where alliances were fragile and promises could be broken as swiftly as they were made. Arthur's strange birth made him not only a figure of destiny, but also a child of the same turbulence that shaped their own lives. Merlin, knowing the dangers that lay ahead, took the infant from Igraine and placed him in the care of another family. Some say he entrusted him to Sir Ector, a loyal noble, who raised Arthur as his own son beside his foster brother, Kay. And so, the boy grew not in a palace nor surrounded by jewels, but in a household of simple duty. He was fed at the same table, trained in the same chores, and taught the same humility as any child in the hall. Picture him as a boy, his hair tousled, his hands grubby from tending to animals, his cheeks flushed from running across fields. He would have risen early with the household, fetching water from the well, sweeping the rushes from the floor, or helping in the kitchen where smoke curled and pots simmered. Like other children, he would have learned to kneel respectfully before his elders, to carry messages swiftly, to listen more than he spoke. There were games, too. Mock battles with wooden sticks, races across the yard, and riddles shared by the hearth. Children's laughter, after all, has never changed, no matter the century. Food was simple, bread baked from barley or rye, a little cheese, perhaps meat if the hunt had been good. On feast days, the family might enjoy roasted fowl or honey cakes, their sweetness lingering long in memory. For children, these rare treats were treasures as precious as gold. Yet hunger was also a companion, for winters were harsh, and supplies often ran thin. Even noble children learned the discipline of eating sparingly when stores grew low. In such a life, Arthur grew, unknown to himself as heir to greatness. He learned patience, resilience, and quiet strength. And perhaps it was this ordinary upbringing that gave him a bond with the common people, a thread of understanding that ran deeper than blood. Then came the moment that revealed who he truly was, the sword in the stone. The land had fallen into disarray once more, its nobles quarreling over who should claim the throne. To settle the question, Merlin, or so the legend tells, placed a sword into a great stone, inscribed with words declaring that only the rightful king of Britain could draw it forth. One by one, warriors and lords attempted the task. They tugged and strained, their arms trembling with effort, but the blade did not yield. It stood unmoved, as if the stone itself laughed at their pride. Days passed, the crowd restless, the nobles muttering. Then young Arthur, barely more than a boy, stepped forward. Accounts differ on why. Some say he sought a weapon for his foster brother Kay, others that Merlin quietly guided him. Yet whatever the reason, Arthur wrapped his hands around the hilt and, without effort, lifted the sword free. Imagine the hush that fell in that moment. The murmurs, the gasps, the disbelief turning to awe. Here was no mighty warlord, no seasoned knight, but a boy of quiet bearing, raised in a household not his own. The stone had spoken, and the people saw destiny shining through humility. For those who first heard this story, sitting in smoky halls as storms battered the doors, it was a tale of wonder. How could a child of uncertain birth become the chosen one? The answer was simple, because hope often rises from the least expected places. The sword in the stone was more than a trick of magic. It was a symbol that greatness could be hidden in the ordinary, waiting for its moment to shine. And so Arthur was revealed as king. But even in that triumph, questions lingered. Was he truly Uther's son, rightful by blood? Or was his claim born of enchantment and fate? The people debated, but many chose to believe. For in their hearts, they wanted to believe that such a king could rise, one who had known the struggles of a child and the weight of daily life. Think of the children who heard this tale as they huddled close to the hearth. They, too, dreamed of better futures, though their lives were bound by fields, flocks, and endless labor. Hearing of Arthur, they might have felt a spark, that even the humblest boy or girl could hold within them the seed of greatness. Legends are, after all, mirrors of our own longings. Which part of Arthur's beginnings resonates most with you? The mystery of his birth, or the quiet strength of a child destined for greatness? Share your thoughts when you can. The embers glow warmly, and as the night deepens, let us step into the vision that Arthur's kingship brought forth. Imagine the land no longer fractured by endless quarrels, no longer trembling at the threat of every raid. Imagine instead a kingdom where the promise of unity and justice shone like dawn breaking through a long storm. This vision took form in a place called Camelot, a name that even now carries a kind of shimmering light. Yet Camelot was not just a castle of stone and banners. It was a living world of people, of bustling markets, fragrant kitchens, echoing halls, and whispered prayers in quiet chambers. To walk there, even in imagination, is to step into the heart of the legend itself. Picture first the Great Hall of Camelot, the space at its center where stone walls rose high and banners of crimson and gold hung proudly. Torches flickered against tapestries, woven with scenes of battles, hunts, and saints. Long wooden tables stretched across the floor, their surfaces worn smooth by feasts and meetings. At night, the hall glowed with candlelight, filled with voices that carried laughter, songs, and arguments alike. Here the round table stood, its circle gleaming, polished by countless hands, a symbol as grand as the stone from which Arthur had first drawn his sword. It was said to hold no head and no foot, for all who sat at it were equal, bound by loyalty to their king and their code. Yet Camelot was more than its hall. Outside the walls, markets bustled. Merchants from distant shires arrived with carts of wares. Bolts of wool dyed in rich hues, glazed pottery, salted fish, and honeycombs glistening with sweetness. The smell of spices drifted from stalls: cinnamon, pepper, saffron. Costly treasures carried across seas and guarded as if they were jewels. Peasants from nearby villages came to trade their eggs, cheese, or flax, filling the air with chatter, bartering, and the bleating of goats tied to posts. Children darted between stalls, their laughter mingling with the calls of hawkers. Within the castle itself, daily life unfolded in rhythms as steady as the turning of seasons. Consider the kitchens, the heart of sustenance. Fires burned hot in stone hearths, cauldrons bubbling with pottage made of grains, vegetables, and sometimes the rare cut of meat. The air was rich with smoke, the sharp scent of onions, and the sweetness of roasting apples. Cooks, often women with strong arms and swift hands, moved constantly, kneading dough, stirring pots, plucking fowl. Their lives were full of labor, yet their skill was essential, for even the finest knight would falter without food to sustain him. Now think of the seamstresses, their fingers nimble as they stitched tunics, gowns, and banners. They worked by daylight near high windows or by candle after dusk, their needles flashing, their threads weaving the colors of the kingdom into garments both plain and splendid. To them, each stitch was duty, but also pride. For when Arthur rode forth in a cloak of rich blue, or Guinevere appeared in a gown trimmed with gold, it was the work of unseen hands that shone before all eyes. And in the stables, the grooms rose before dawn, their breath misting in the cold air as they mucked stalls, brushed coats, and fed oats to the great horses of the knights. They knew each beast by name, by temperament, by the sound of its hoof on stone. For every tournament, every battle, every parade, the stable hands had readied the steeds, unseen yet vital to the pageantry and strength of Camelot. Now lift your eyes again to the court itself. Feasts were held with grandeur. Platters of roasted meat, loaves of bread, and wheels of cheese lined the tables, and goblets of wine gleamed in the candlelight. Harpers plucked strings, their music weaving through the air, while jesters tumbled and poets recited verses. The clatter of knives against plates mixed with laughter and the murmur of quiet conversations. Yet amid the splendor, one could also glimpse the humanity of it all. The tired servant balancing trays, the maid refilling cups, the knight laughing too loudly after too much wine. Camelot was no paradise free of flaws. It was alive, and therefore imperfect, yet beautiful in its striving. At the heart of this kingdom stood Guinevere, Arthur's queen. To some, she was a figure of romance, a lady draped in silks, smiling serenely at her king. Yet her reality was heavier. As queen, she bore the weight of diplomacy, of hosting nobles, of guiding women of the court. She was praised for her beauty, yes, but also judged by it, her every gesture noted and remembered. Behind her crown was a woman with her own longings and doubts. Imagine her walking through the gardens of Camelot, where roses climbed trellises and herbs grew in neat beds. Perhaps she pauses by a fountain, its water trickling softly, and allows herself a breath of solitude. She might think of her youth, of the life she left behind to stand beside Arthur, of the expectations pressed upon her shoulders. Was it easy to be queen? Hardly. Every smile had to be measured, every kindness balanced, every choice watched. And yet, within her, like any woman, there was a beating heart, capable of love, of laughter, of sorrow. It is easy, when we hear legends, to let the bright images blind us, to see only the shining halls, the feasts, the noble speeches. But legends are woven from human threads. Camelot was not simply knights in gleaming mail and queens in radiant gowns. It was cooks sweating by the fire, children running through the market, seamstresses bent over stitches, grooms whispering softly to their horses, and a queen who carried both duty and humanity within her. Perhaps that is why Camelot endures. Not because it was perfect, but because it was alive. Because it gave a face to the dream of a better world, while never forgetting the toil that made such a world possible. So, I invite you now to step into that dream and ask yourself, if you were part of Camelot, where would you find yourself? In the kitchens, the gardens, the library, or beside the knights? I'd love to hear your answer. The fire burns low tonight, and the quiet feels like a perfect time to think about the knights who filled Camelot's hall with both promise and contradiction. The round table, so often spoken of as a shining circle of brotherhood, was more than furniture. It was an idea. No head, no foot, no seat higher than another's. It symbolized equality among men who were otherwise bound by rank, by land, and by pride. Around it, Arthur gathered those he believed could embody the dream of a kingdom governed by loyalty, honor, and justice. The word so often tied to these men is chivalry. It is a word wrapped in images of gallantry, of knights kneeling to ladies, of vows spoken in solemn voices before shimmering banners. But what did it mean in truth? At its core, chivalry was an attempt to shape the wildness of warrior life into something nobler. Knights were trained from youth to fight, to wield sword and lance, to ride fearlessly into battle. Left ungoverned, such strength could turn to cruelty or greed. Chivalry was meant to temper this with loyalty to king, protection of the weak, defense of the church, and courtesy to women. It was a code, a hope, a guide for men raised to carry weapons. Yet like any human ideal, it was easier to speak than to live. Think of Lancelot, perhaps the most famous of all Arthur's knights. His courage in battle was unmatched, his devotion to Arthur deep, his skill with sword and lance legendary. To the common folk, he must have seemed larger than life, a figure of awe. Imagine a child in a village, watching knights ride past, whispering that among them rode Lancelot himself. Perhaps that child felt pride, believing such a man defended their king and their land. Yet Lancelot's story is also woven with sorrow. His love for Queen Guinevere, true, passionate, and forbidden, shattered the very ideals he embodied. He was both the greatest of knights and the one whose heart led him astray. Is it not often so with ideals, that those who strive highest sometimes stumble hardest? Then there was Gawain, Arthur's nephew, known for his strength and fierce loyalty. Tales tell of his honor, his boldness, his readiness to defend the weak. But he too carried flaws. In the story of the Green Knight, he accepts a challenge meant to test his courage and honesty. He strikes boldly, yet when tested in turn, he hides a gift that might protect his life. His failure was small, even human, but in that failing the legend speaks. Even the bravest knight is not immune to fear. And yet, Gawain admitted his fault, wore his shame openly, and from that came a lesson in humility. The code of chivalry, it seems, was not about being perfect, but about striving, even through imperfection, to live with integrity. Percival, too, holds a place in the circle. In early tales, he is the pure-hearted youth, untrained and unworldly, who stumbles into knighthood with innocence that others might mock. But his simplicity allows him to approach the quest for the Holy Grail with a sincerity others lack. Ordinary folk, hearing his story, might have felt a certain kinship. He was not a noble steeped in grandeur, but a boy who began in ignorance and grew into wisdom. Was he not a reminder that greatness could emerge from the humblest of beginnings? To the people who lived beyond Camelot's walls, the farmers, the seamstresses, the blacksmiths, these knights must have been both hope and shadow. Hope, because they represented strength in a dangerous world. Men who might defend their village from raiders, who might uphold justice where local lords failed. But shadow, too, because knights were still men of war. Their battles trampled fields. Their rivalries drew blood. Their quarrels sometimes spilled into the lives of those with no part in their causes. For every tale of Lancelot's gallantry, there may have been a family mourning livestock lost to an army's march, or a farmer nursing wounds after being caught in the path of a feud. Ideals shine, but reality is never free of shadow. And yet, those ideals mattered. Loyalty, courage, honor. These were not empty words. They gave shape to a vision of what men with power could strive for. A knight might fail, as Gawain did when fear overcame him, or as Lancelot did when love conflicted with loyalty. But the very act of setting the ideal shaped the stories told, the songs sung, the lessons whispered to children. When a knight bowed to protect a widow or raised his shield for the weak, the code lived, even if imperfectly. Consider how these ideals touched ordinary life. A young boy might be taught that to keep his word was as noble as a knight keeping an oath. A young girl might see in the courtesy of knights a sign that her voice mattered in a world that often ignored women. Even the rituals of hospitality, offering bread to a stranger, shelter to a traveler, were tied to this culture of honor. Chivalry may have been imperfectly lived, but it offered a language of goodness that reached beyond Camelot's circle. Do you wonder, as I do, whether such ideals still echo today? When we speak of loyalty to friends, of standing up for what is right, of choosing kindness over cruelty, are we not still breathing life into the same hopes? Perhaps we no longer wear armor or ride beneath banners, but the longing for honor, for justice, for courage in the face of fear, those remain as human as ever. So tonight, as you drift deeper into rest, carry with you the image of those knights. Not flawless, not perfect, but striving, shining in battle, faltering in love, growing in humility. Legends remember them in bright colors, but beneath the armor they were men, as full of contradictions as any of us. And that is why they endure, because we too live between ideals and reality, between hope and flaw, and still we strive. Do you believe ideals like loyalty and honor still guide us today? Share your reflections if you feel inspired. The night is still, the fire low, and it feels fitting to turn to the heart of Arthur's legend. Not the shining swords, not the banners in battle, but the quieter, more fragile threads that weave through every tale of human life. Love, loyalty, and betrayal. No story of Camelot can be told without speaking of Guinevere and Lancelot, whose bond was as beautiful as it was destructive, as tender as it was tragic. Guinevere entered the story as Arthur's queen, a woman bound to duty, chosen for her grace, her intelligence, and perhaps, in part, for the alliances her marriage secured. To many, she was the heart of Camelot, presiding over feasts, offering counsel, embodying the dignity of the crown. Yet behind the titles, she was a woman, breathing, feeling, carrying both hopes and burdens. Marriage in those times was seldom about romance, especially at such heights of power. Love was a gift if it came at all. For Guinevere, love arrived not in her king, but in his most trusted knight. Lancelot's story, which once seemed so full of shining loyalty, bent under the weight of that love. He was sworn to Arthur, bound by oath shaped by chivalry. Yet in Guinevere he found something irresistible, something that called to the deepest parts of his being. Was it her beauty? Certainly. But more than that, it was her presence, her mind, her shared humanity in a world that so often demanded perfection of them both. In their secret moments, there was tenderness, laughter, the kind of comfort that cannot be commanded by crown or duty. And yet, each stolen glance, each whispered word, was a thread pulled loose from Camelot's fabric. To the people of the time, the idea of such a betrayal would have been both scandalous and understandable. For women especially, caught in marriages of duty, the longing for love must have been keenly felt. How many women listened to Guinevere's story and recognized their own quiet ache, their own hidden yearning? And how many, bound by faith or fear, never dared to step beyond the lines drawn for them? The love between Guinevere and Lancelot was never simple. It was joy shadowed by guilt, devotion edged with danger. When discovered, it tore Camelot apart. Arthur, the just and noble king, found himself betrayed by the two he trusted most. His crown represented order, justice, and stability, but within his own hall the foundations crumbled. The round table, once whole, fractured under the weight of human hearts. Can a kingdom built on ideals withstand the truth of longing and betrayal? That was the question their story left behind. But pause with me for a moment and consider this not as legend but as life. What was it to be Guinevere? To be loved by one man she admired, but perhaps did not choose, and to be adored by another who saw her fully? Women of her time lived with duty pressing heavily upon them. A queen was not free to follow her heart, just as a farmer's daughter was not free to choose her future. Marriages were contracts, woven with land, alliances, and family obligations. Yet hearts, as we know, do not always follow rules. Guinevere's choices were dangerous, yes, but they were also deeply human. In her, we glimpse the struggles of countless women. Some longed quietly, some acted boldly, some endured silently, all bound by expectations written by others. Love, when it came, was often a risk, sometimes even a rebellion. Guinevere's love for Lancelot was a rebellion, though not against Arthur alone. It was a rebellion against a world that saw her chiefly as a queen, not as a woman with desires of her own. Do we condemn her, or do we understand her? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between. And what of loyalty? To Arthur, loyalty was everything. The bond that held together a fragile realm, the promise that made his knights more than warriors. Yet loyalty is never simple when weighed against love. Lancelot's loyalty to Arthur was deep, but his devotion to Guinevere was deeper still. His betrayal was not born of malice, but of love that refused to be quieted. Is it not often so that betrayal hurts most when it comes from those who never wished to harm us? The fall of Camelot is often traced to this triangle. A king betrayed, a queen torn, a knight divided. But legends endure not because they are perfect tales, but because they echo truths of the heart. Who among us has not felt the pull between duty and desire? Who has not known the ache of longing, the guilt of choosing, the fear of hurting someone we hold dear? Behind every grand legend are the same fragile threads of human life. Hearts longing, breaking, and hoping, just as ours do. As you rest tonight, think not only of Camelot's collapse, but of the tenderness that once lived there too. Picture Guinevere at a window, gazing across gardens, her thoughts heavy with conflict. Picture Lancelot, armored and strong, yet undone by the softness of love. Picture Arthur, noble and steadfast, struggling to understand how those he trusted most could wound him so. It is a story of grandeur, yes, but also a story of quiet tears and whispered promises. And so, the legend reminds us, love is powerful, loyalty is fragile, betrayal is devastating, and yet all three are inseparable from what it means to be human. They are timeless, written into every age, spoken in every story, lived in every heart. Love, loyalty, and betrayal, timeless themes. If you could ask Guinevere one question, what would it be? Let me know. The story of Camelot grows quieter now, shifting from the clash of swords and the turmoil of broken vows to something more mysterious, more ethereal. The quest for the Holy Grail was unlike any other tale told at Arthur's court. It was not about lands to be won or enemies to be defeated, but about something deeper, a journey of the spirit, a longing for the divine, a search for meaning that stretched beyond the reach of human hands. The Grail itself was said to be a vessel of holiness, sometimes imagined as the cup used at the Last Supper, sometimes as the chalice that caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion. Whatever form it took, it was not just an object, it was an idea shimmering at the edge of faith. For Arthur's knights, who lived by oaths and codes, The Grail was a perfection they could barely grasp, a vision of purity in a world so full of flaws. It was a call to seek not glory or conquest, but salvation, truth, and closeness to God. Yet to set out on such a quest was to leave behind the comfort of Camelot's hearth, the safety of its walls, the laughter of its feasts. Each knight who rode forth knew that this journey was different. Battles might be fought along the way, but they were not the heart of it. The Grail demanded something greater than strength. It demanded purity of soul, humility, and endurance. Some knights rode in hope, others in pride, but very few ever returned. For ordinary folk, hearing these stories, the Grail must have seemed both wondrous and distant. Imagine a woman spinning wool by firelight, listening as a traveling bard spoke of the knights searching for a holy cup. To her, the Grail might not be a chalice at all, but a symbol of her own hopes, health for her child, a good harvest, peace in her village. For a farmer bent over fields, the Grail could mean relief from hunger, or the dream of justice in a world where the strong so often preyed on the weak. Legends shape themselves to the needs of those who hear them, and perhaps the Grail was never one thing, but many. Among the knights, the story of Galahad shines brightest. The son of Lancelot, he was said to be pure of heart, untouched by the world's temptations, and thus uniquely worthy of beholding the Grail. Where others faltered, Galahad endured. His quest was not marked by grand battles, but by steadfast faith and innocence. In him, people saw what humanity might be if it could rise above sin and weakness. Yet there is both comfort and sorrow in his tale. Comfort because purity prevailed. Sorrow because such purity seemed impossible for most. Was the Grail meant to be attained by all, or only glimpsed as a reminder of what we long for but cannot hold? Others failed where Galahad succeeded. Lancelot, despite his greatness, could not achieve the Grail because of his love for Guinevere, his divided heart. Gawain, bold and fierce, lacked the humility needed. Percival, earnest and pure, came close, but even he stumbled through doubt and hesitation. Their failings mirror our own, do they not? For who among us has not longed for goodness yet fallen short, sought peace yet been troubled by restlessness, reached for perfection only to find our hands empty? The Grail quest is, in truth, the story of every soul, drawn by light, hindered by weakness, but ever seeking. Faith and doubt walked hand in hand in these tales. The knights rode believing, yet often questioned themselves. Was the Grail truly out there? Was the journey worth the suffering? Doubt is not the opposite of faith, but its companion, shaping it, testing it, deepening it. For the people of medieval Britain, faith was the fabric of life, but life was hard, uncertain, fragile. Stories of the Grail gave them both hope and a mirror, hope that holiness could be found, and a mirror of their own struggles to endure in the face of hardship. Endurance, more than victory, was at the heart of this quest. Many knights rode until their strength failed, until their bodies gave out, until their souls were tested beyond bearing. And yet, the quest itself gave meaning. To seek the Grail was to strive for something higher, even if one never reached it. Does this not echo our own lives? We, too, carry quests within us. Not always for holy relics, but for peace of mind, for love, for wisdom, for belonging. Sometimes we achieve glimpses of these things, fleeting yet luminous. Sometimes we wander, searching, not finding, but the search itself shapes who we are. Perhaps that is why the Grail remains so powerful a symbol. It is less about the vessel and more about the yearning. We all long for something beyond the day's toil, something that whispers of meaning. The knights of Camelot sought the Grail on horseback, with swords and prayers. We seek ours in quieter ways. In relationships, in reflection, in moments of beauty, in the hope that tomorrow will bring light. As you rest tonight, imagine the long road of that quest. The lonely forests, the mist over rivers, the silence of chapels where knights knelt in prayer. Imagine the weight of armor, the ache of longing, the faint glimmer of light that always seemed just out of reach. And then imagine your own Grail, what it might be, what gives you strength to endure, what draws you onward when the road is long. What would your grail be today? Peace, love, wisdom? I'd love to know if you feel comfortable sharing. The glow of Camelot, which once shone so brightly, began at last to dim. Legends tell us that it was not a sudden fall, like a tower struck by lightning, but a slow unraveling, like threads loosening from a woven cloth. The round table, once whole and shining, had already cracked beneath the weight of love and betrayal. The Grail quest had scattered the knights, leaving the circle broken. And into that fracture stepped Mordred, the figure who would bring the dream of Camelot to its final twilight. Mordred's story is told in many ways. In some tales, he was Arthur's nephew, in others, his son, born of circumstances too tangled and dark to bring peace. However he came into being, Mordred carried within him both the blood of the king and the shadow of betrayal. Ambitious, cunning, and restless, he did not dream of serving at Arthur's side, but of seizing Arthur's throne. And where once Arthur's unity bound the land, now suspicion and weariness made space for treachery. As armies gathered, one can imagine the lives of ordinary people caught in the storm. A farmer, rising early to tend the fields, might see the horizon darken with soldiers marching. For him, it was not legend but loss. Trampled crops, livestock seized, sons drawn into battles they did not understand. A seamstress in a village might weep as her brother was called to arms, knowing the war was not truly his, but belonging to kings and knights who fought for pride and power. For women, the toll was often heaviest, waiting for men who did not return, carrying the weight of keeping life going in the silence of absence. The fall of Camelot was not only a tale of lords and knights, it was written on the weary shoulders of common folk. The final battle came at Camelot, where Arthur and Mordred's forces met in fury. It is said that Arthur, noble and resolute to the end, struck Mordred down, though he himself was mortally wounded. The clash was fierce, but it was also sorrowful. A kingdom devouring itself, brothers fighting brothers, the dream of justice drowned in blood and dust. For those who believed in Arthur's vision, it must have felt like the end of hope itself. The land that had once glowed with possibility lay scarred, its knights fallen, its king broken. And yet, even in ruin, the legend offers mystery. For Arthur did not simply die as other men do. He was carried, it is said, across the waters to Avalon, a place both near and far, both earthly and otherworldly. Some called it an island of healing, where the wounds of the body and soul could be mended. Others saw it as the gateway between this world and the next. To Avalon, Arthur was born, not as a corpse, but as a king who might one day return. This hope, the hope of return, lingered in the hearts of his people, softening the grief of his departure. Think of the comfort this must have brought to those left behind. When a loved one is lost, the hardest thing to bear is finality. To imagine instead that Arthur only slept, waiting for a time when Britain might need him again, was to imagine that endings could hold seeds of renewal. Mothers could tell their children, "The king will come again when our land cries out." Elders could remind the young, "Justice never truly dies, it only rests until called forth once more." Avalon was not only Arthur's resting place. It was the people's way of carrying hope in the midst of despair. Even today, the legend stirs that same gentle promise. For who among us does not wish to believe that broken things might one day be made whole? That what we lose might not be gone forever, but waiting in some unseen place. The fall of Camelot speaks of ruin, yes, but it also whispers of healing, of return, of the enduring power of hope. As the embers burn low tonight, I think of those who lived through that ending. The soldier who fought at Camelot and limped home to fields now barren. The widow who kept the hearth alive, whispering Arthur's name like a prayer. The children who grew up hearing that though Camelot had fallen, its spirit lived on, somewhere just out of reach. Their grief was real, their lives scarred, and yet they carried with them a story that made the burden lighter. If legends teach us anything, perhaps it is that even endings carry seeds of hope. Do you believe Camelot still lives on in spirit? Tell me what you think. The story of Arthur has been told for more than 1,000 years, and still it lingers, like the echo of a song that never quite fades. From medieval monasteries to Victorian poets, from village hearths to modern screens, the tale of Camelot has been reshaped and retold, yet its heart remains the same. There is something in it that belongs not only to the past, but to every age that remembers it. Why does Arthur endure? Perhaps because he embodies a dream that all people share. The hope for justice, the vision of a community built on fairness, loyalty, and courage. When storytellers spoke of Arthur gathering knights around the round table, they were not only describing a king, they were describing an ideal. A place where no voice was higher than another, where strength was used for protection rather than conquest, where honor guided every action. Of course, the reality was more complicated. Even in the old tales, knights faltered, betrayals crept in, and ideals fell short. Yet perhaps that is why the legend is so powerful. It does not speak of perfection easily attained. It speaks of striving, of reaching for a better way even when failure is certain. The story tells us that human lives are messy, tangled with love and loss, yet still capable of great courage and enduring hope. In Guinevere's quiet strength, in Lancelot's flawed loyalty, in Arthur's vision that outlived even his own reign, we find reflections of ourselves. Love and betrayal, loyalty and doubt, sorrow and resilience. These are not only medieval themes, they are human themes. Every listener, in every century, has found some piece of their own heart within the story of Camelot. And what of us today? Though the trappings of knights and castles are gone, the longings that shaped them remain. We still dream of fairness. We still hunger for leaders who will place the good of the many above the pride of the few. We still carry the ache of betrayal, the hope of forgiveness, the yearning for a place where we belong. In this sense, Camelot is not far away at all. It is within us, wherever we nurture justice, love, and community. Think for a moment of your own life. Perhaps your round table is a circle of friends who support you. Perhaps your Camelot is a family gathered around a meal, or a classroom where kindness is taught, or even a quiet place in your own heart where you feel safe and strong. Legends last because they are mirrors. What we see in them is also what we carry within ourselves. The resilience of Arthur's tale is a reminder that stories are not only entertainment. They are lanterns we pass from one generation to the next. Each retelling lights the path a little differently, but the glow remains. A medieval monk might have told it to teach faith. A Victorian poet might have written it as a warning about pride. Today, perhaps, we tell it as a way to remember that even in uncertain times, visions of justice and love still matter. So as this story draws to a close tonight, let us pause and listen, not only to the echoes of ancient voices, but to our own. What is your Camelot? Where do you feel most whole, most at peace, most inspired to live with courage and compassion? Perhaps it is a place, perhaps a person, perhaps a dream. Legends endure because they invite us to ask these questions and to carry their answers into the lives we live. Arthur may have sailed to Avalon, but his spirit has never left us. Each time we speak his name, each time we imagine a world where fairness and loyalty guide us, the legend lives again. And perhaps that is the truest form of immortality. Not a king returning from across the waters, but a story reborn in every heart that remembers it. Do you carry your own Camelot, your safe, inspiring place? If so, I'd love to hear about it.